Hi, everyone. Welcome to How the Business is Played. I'm your host, Sharice Williams, and I am very excited to have a dear friend and media broadcaster, LaChina Robinson, join us on the show today. So, LaChina, can you give everyone a little bit about your background?
Yes. Hey, Sharice. It's so great to
Hey,
be
girl.
here with you. Congratulations on your new platform. So I am, as you mentioned, a broadcaster. I work for ESPN as an analyst and host for the last almost 20 years, which makes me feel super old. but
How did we get
um,
here?
I know, right? I've worked exclusively in women's basketball my entire career. I worked for 15 years in college basketball, not doing as much in that space over the last few years, but primarily now in the WNBA. I am an analyst. I sometimes work as a studio host. I have also done broadcasting on the international side for NBC, including the most recent Olympics for our USA women's basketball team. That's kind of my life centers around women's basketball. I'm a former player, played at Wake Forest, and then got into doing some college athletic administration at Georgia Tech, and from there pivoted into broadcasting, and that's where I've been ever since.
And you're someone that I absolutely admire. I love the pivot that you made from working in college athletics to broadcasting. And I love that you have been so focused and dedicated to women's sports. Obviously, there could have been other options for you to go into. You're clearly multi-talented, but I love that you've been rocking with it from the beginning and probably feeling really good to see that now that other people are starting to realize that this is really great content to watch and you can be a part of the storytelling.
Yeah, it's been amazing to see how women's basketball is growing. I mean, all of women's sports, but especially women's basketball. And you're absolutely right. I mean, along the way, I got so many questions like, why don't you work football? Or why don't you work men's basketball? Like, that's where all the prestige and the money is and the attention. And I'm like, no, actually, women's basketball is big time. Like, just because people weren't seeing the value didn't take away from what I knew the product was and could be. And with my life being impacted by sport, I know yours was as well, Sharice, as a former student athlete, like I wanted to give back to the game and I wanted to share with more people how women's basketball had impacted my life and how powerful and amazing these women and dynamic these women are in so many ways. So I wake up every day and get to serve my passion and honestly work in a space that for a very long time I knew was worth investing in, and I'm glad that that's where I've invested my career.
Yes, I love it. And to your point, like people are starting to realize the value. Speaking of value, I woke up this morning and saw that Foot Locker was acquired by Dick's Sporting Goods. And to tie it to, women's basketball, obviously Asia Wilson dropped her A1s last week. And I've been seeing, first of all, obsessed with the entire rollout, the storytelling, the authenticity behind it, the Easter eggs and the creative, like the whole thing. Nike, like, take a bow because amazing job. But also it was being sold in like every platform. So I've seen the ads, for Dick's Sporting Goods in particular. So when it dropped today that Foot Locker was being acquired for $2.4 billion, my head started spinning about what this means for sneaker culture and for retailers. I wasn't sure if you had a chance to read up on it or you had any thoughts around what it could all mean.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, for me, a little part of me died because Foot Locker has been such a big part of my sport experience going back to being a little girl. Like Foot Locker was the place where you would go. Like that was the only place. This was before people were shopping online and able to, get things at the drop of a hat. And we had literally had to go to Foot Locker. So I was like, wait, what is happening with Foot Locker? Where is it going? So that's my immediate thought. And you would know more in terms of just the business acquisition side. So I'd love to hear your thoughts too. But what I will say about Dick's Sporting Goods is I have loved the way they have activated on the women's sports side. I mean, Dick's Sporting Goods is one of the brands who you may not see plastered on the court when you turn on your television, or you may not see their names on the front of the jerseys. But look at some of the events and activations that have happened around women's sports. They have really been front and center. I'm thinking about even a partnership that they had with Cheryl Swoops, like acknowledging the legends of the game, and just different places that they've shown up that I've been like, wow, Dick's Sporting Goods is really investing. So I think that's the biggest thing for me, is I'm always happy to see companies expand that have been treating women's sports the way they deserve. And that's nothing against Foot Locker per se, but it's just clear that Dick's Sporting Goods had the vision, and they were one of the first to really kind of step out and say, okay, we're going to invest in this space. So I'm just wondering what this acquisition will mean as they continue to expand their footprint in women's sports.
Yes, no, I absolutely was wondering the same thing. And one thing that what has been mentioned in all the articles is that Foot Locker and all of its brands, Kids Foot Locker, all that stuff is going to maintain their brand identity, and will as well. So that's great. But the question what you're bringing up is still valid. Like, what are their roles? In some ways, they've been competitors the entire time from a business standpoint, selling, similar things. And one would argue, well, I had a chance to work in this world when I was at Under Armour, obviously. So both of them were folks that would be distributors of our products. So I had to understand their consumer. And Foot Locker definitely was more of basketball and sneaker culture, more streetwear or street style, I should say, in terms of what they carried. Whereas Dick's was more, at the time, more functional, and the types of offerings they would have inside their store, and also had more things like where you go to buy your baseball bats or footballs,
equipment,
right? Yeah, equipment, and with some apparel and some shoes and things like that, right? So they kind of had different reasons to shop. But to your point, the brands meant something, and so you expected to see certain things in there. And so what I find intriguing is I wonder what position or what leverage this could potentially give a Dick's in working with a Nike or Adidas or anyone else, because if they're the main shop where people are going now, if they're going to go brick and mortar to go buy things, they have all the leverage. So you want your things to drop in their store, and if you're Dick's, you might want a certain level of margin, in these different stores. I find that very interesting in terms of what this is going to mean in their relationship there, or if it's going to impact consumers from a pricing standpoint. Should there be a conversation about those sorts of things?
Yeah, no, that's fascinating that Foot Locker is going to still keep the branding, because I was just thinking of what an opportunity that would be for Dick's to expand their brand. I mean, I'm thinking about where you would normally see a Dick's is like more, their stores are so big and so vast, but a Foot Locker in the city, like there's so many more locations for Dick's Sporting Goods to kind of infiltrate. So I am excited to hear that Foot Locker will still keep the brand, but more interested in now, what Dick's wants to do with this partnership. But you're right. I mean, it's definitely going to give them a leg up when it comes to the footwear industry, because Foot Locker was a major, part of my growth when it came to that part of apparel, that section of apparel.
For sure. And it potentially could still be, right? Like, so maybe that's part of the conversation. So Foot Locker and its family of brands may carry certain things there, whereas Dick's may carry a different, plethora of items, same brands, but maybe different colorways, or, whatever it is to really match the appeal of the consumer. But your point around the partnerships is really valid, because Foot Locker I didn't see as much in terms, in women's sports in particular, but I always felt they could and should be there. So I wonder if they take that influence from Dick's, and, maybe they both can be there, or maybe that's a lane for Foot Locker to grow and Dick's to go somewhere else. So it is very fascinating, because they both have partnerships on some level and have certain lanes, but how did they make it work together or stay separate? So I'm definitely interested in that as well. But what it speaks to, because it's really kind of tied around, basketball, that's what I think about when I think of Foot Locker. And even with the Dick's acquisition, that's what's coming to mind for me, because that's just top of mind right now. Women's sports just continues to do amazing things. And we were talking the other week around Unrivaled. Obviously, it wrapped their season, and all the numbers have been coming out around how well it did. But then again, I think just this morning or yesterday, an announcement around Unrivaled being at Cannes, this year. And Cannes, I have not had the chance to go to that festival. It's where everyone wants to go from an advertising perspective. And I was all set until I found out that Jackson's preschool graduation was going to be taking place during that time. So
dang it. But that is important. You need to be there.
It's very, very important. Like, I definitely have decided that I'm going to dedicate time to things like that. They only happen once when you graduate from preschool, so we'll miss it. But the idea of Unrivaled being there with Sephora was really eye-opening for me. And I haven't had a chance yet to see if other leagues have had the chance to be there to showcase themselves in the past, but I don't recall hearing that. So that's just speaking to Sephora, one, who's bringing their partner to the table and Unrivaled. But two, it speaks to Unrivaled being the one that comes, because Sephora has a lot of partners that they could be showcasing, at Cannes, but they're going to Sports Beach with Unrivaled. So I think my takeaway is that this crossover between sports and business and fashion and beauty, people were looking at it as something nice and interesting, but clearly once you get to a Cannes level, it showcases how much real impact is actually taking place. So I wish I could go and be a part of it, but I'm just excited for Unrivaled and for Sephora.
Yeah, what it says to me is that there is a lot of interest and intrigue on how brands can partner with women's sports teams and leagues. And that sure is the step that I'm grateful a lot of people are taking, because what we're seeing is a lot of brands want to infiltrate and they want to partner with, say, the WNBA or NWSL, but they don't necessarily have the knowledge on how to. And I think that's where there could be missed opportunities. Like, the WNBA's profile as an investment is very different from the NBA. And if you haven't been around women's sports, we know a lot of these new sponsors and organizations, et cetera, that want to get involved haven't been. And not everyone has maybe the bandwidth starting out to hire a whole women's sports department, right? Where they can go and get folks who have been doing this work. So can you go to Cannes and listen to these conversations and really have an understanding on how organic partnerships are developed? I mean, looking at the Sephora activations at Unrivaled, I was like, this feels so natural, so in line with everything that the W stands for. These women are not having to step outside of themselves to make this partnership feel organic. This is who they are. Sephora's meeting them who they are. They need that glam room. They need to look good when they're coming in their tunnel walks. And so that is what excites me about this conversation, is the other brands and the audience who maybe want to partner with women's sports leagues can come to understand how you create that value and that authentic partnership and not just throw money at a brand. And so that's what excites me about this taking place.
And you know what else, LaChina? I think it's also a bit of a light on the partnerships that are not being highlighted, right? Like, a lot of other leagues, teams have been existing for a long time on the men's side and the women's side, but yet we have not seen this level of activate or bringing it to life in this sort of way before. And so I think it just speaks to your point, the authenticity, the intentionality that was taking place, but it also makes me wonder, why hasn't this happened for others in the past? And again, we've been fans of, supporters of women's sports for a long time. And I truly believe, and studies have definitely shown, that the women's sports fan is different in terms of their level of dedication, how they spend their dollars, etc. And perhaps that's the reason why a Sephora knew what to do, or at least took the steps to try to do the right thing here. Whereas I think some other partnerships really are a bit dry in terms of, I pay you this to own this category, and we're going to have an athlete wear this thing and show up in this place because that's what you check the box and do. And I think that you have to get to know the women's sports fan, and they're not going to really accept that. So it's important. It kind of forces the brands to do things the right way so that the fans can actually see the benefit of this, and so that it makes sense for everyone.
Yeah, and I would be curious of your insight, because you've brought partnerships to life when it comes to women's sports at some of your prior stops, as much as you can speak to those. But how does that happen? How do you organically and authentically bring in a partnership that is not just dollar-based, but showcase in the product and elevates and amplifies these women and what they're doing on and off the court?
Yeah, well, you said it best. It's about having the right people in the room. as you were talking, the activation that came to mind was the super scrappy thing we did during the Wubble, when we created the crossover salon, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh. That was so great.
Right. So go ahead.
No, I said that's one of my favorites. Like literally, they needed a salon. Like they were in the Wubble. I remember like building a beer hadn't had his hair cut in forever. Something crazy was going on with it. Like there was just a great storyline there. There was a need, and you came up with a solution that was so organic and just it was incredibly, I thought, insightful in terms of the amount of touch points you had to the league and understanding of what their players needed.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. And I was privileged to be in a seat where I can control money, right? And be able to make that come to happen. And I had great partners in the WNBA to allow me to work with them to come up with something super scrappy. But the brand was Mountain Dew.
Yeah.
Really nothing to do with beauty necessarily. But what they were about was about people having the energy to do you, basically, and to be about you, right? So that was the attitude that the brand brought forward. And so when you thought about the salon and, feel good, play good, and all that sort of stuff that was going on, of course, this was a brand that had the right to create that experience for the women. And to your point, I know what their money situation was looking like. I know how hard, I mean, for all of us in 2020 to not be able to have the things that you're used to having, your stylist, your family, whomever around, because you didn't want to get, COVID-19. So being able to ensure that it was free, that they could really have complimentary services. Like I knew that that was important to them and that a fan of theirs would see Mountain Dew in a positive light for doing that. And also that these players would see them that way as well. So those insights, you're right. You can't just go read about it. You have to be plugged in, to what's happening to do that. And I do think that's where brands really need to think about who's working their departments and or get the right consultant so they don't miss the moments and they know what to do if they get a great partnership. Yeah. Like FENTY and, the New York Liberty. I about lost my mind when the Met Gala, which is a whole nother subject, we'll just hit that. The Met Gala took place, right? So first of all, like the New York Liberty crew, 8 down. Yeah. Like, yeah. Are you kidding me? Amazing. I love the diversity and what they were wearing and bringing their personality to life. I just thought that Sergio and his team did such an amazing job. And I love that they trusted him with that. But the fact that they were there, the fact that I know Angel was a part of the committee, I believe, that was planning. And then you see other athletes, Jalen Hurts. It's just a moment in terms of sports being front and center at a cultural iconic event like the Met Gala.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And what I thought was so amazing is, well, first of all, on the host committee, there were a lot of athletes, right? So that was to me setting the tone that there was going to be a lot of crossover, and shout out to Anna Wintour and her crew for just understanding the moment, especially coming off of the Olympics, knowing how big of a platform athletes have had and just the growth of sport. I mean, while the numbers are going down in other areas of entertainment, sport continues to grow, right? And so like them really just paying attention and understanding that like athletes are the brand and leading into that. But it's also just like, the women, it's the women for me every time. And like Serena and Angel Reese, and just understanding how beautiful and incredibly like entertaining these women are outside of sport, right? Like you're getting to see them in ways. And to me, this has been everything. I mean, we talk about the intersections with beauty and even now television comedy, like all the places the WNBA is infiltrating. But when you elevate their platforms to a place like the Met Gala, you're really acknowledging the excellence of these women in other areas. And for so long in women's sports, number one, no one wanted to even recognize the fact that they were great at sports, right? So it was first convincing them that women deserved a space here, but now it's expanding their minds to, but they're also beautiful and they're mothers and they're entrepreneurs and they have philanthropic endeavors. And like, how can we tap into all these other things that they are? And so the fashion elevation at a place like the Met Gala, and allowing people who may not necessarily care about sport as much, but they love this dress that Serena has on, to get on Google. I mean, they should know who Serena is, but just want to tap in a deeper way. Who is Angel Reese, and who are these women I'm seeing here at the Met Gala? And also telling other beauty brands that there is value. If Anna Wintour thinks these athletes are deserving of invitation, where are the rest of the fashion and beauty brands? They definitely need to catch up.
Definitely need to catch up. I've been saying this for a long time, and you are absolutely right. Like, there's so much there. And again, like, my mouth is still dropped at the Liberty crew. And the reason being is because I just loved the different looks that they had going on. And I love that they chose a Black designer to work with. I think that ownership, obviously being Asian, and it also just really gets it being in New York City. I love that they end up going with that particular Black designer for the moment, and they did look fantastic. And to your point around athletes, I think that the W in basketball has risen in terms of people like finally getting it and seeing them as more mainstream. And then obviously you had sports like tennis, that with Serena being a big part of, in recent years of it really elevating. You have others behind, but there's some other sports where we're not seeing them yet, in these spaces. So I'm looking, I think for me, now that we have seen the athletes have been introduced, to the Met Gala, or getting the invitation and showing up beautifully, handsomely, all the different things, however we want to describe them. I'm interested to see what other leagues' athletes might be able to get the invitation and level up to the experience. So I'm going to be keeping my eye on that to see.
And I think something important to note is that this was a connection that seemed to develop through the Liberty's ownership group. Like, to your point, like, the Liberty were there, they were representing, obviously this event happens in New York, but it was the relationships, I believe, of, the Tsai family, who was also present, but like, your ownership group and their willingness to bring you in on those higher levels of access are so meaningful. And I know for a fact that the New York Liberty ownership has, in particular, obviously, besides, like, they have called in so many people that they know to sit courtside, to, they have access to celebrities, they have access to major brands. And so I think it's important to acknowledge how that aspect of ownership has become so much more important in free agency, and how decisions are being made in these organizations is like, what kind of access do you have? What are you willing to utilize to get these players a bigger platform? And I just think that was a beautiful display of what we saw with the Liberty at the Met Gala.
Yes. And, speaking of partnerships and brands, what I started to say, FENTY Beauty coming out as a partner of the New York Liberty. I did not see that coming. Not that it wasn't possible, but I just did not see it coming. And they are a brand known for everyone, right? All the different skin, tones and shades they have. Like, they want you to be seen, feel like there's something for you. And they were doing that when the industry was not talking to people of color as directly as they are right now. So the fact that they have chosen the Liberty, because I imagine they had any team they could have worked with, even the league potentially, they chose the Liberty in New York City, as we know, very diverse city. We've already talked about the ownership and the relationship, and putting their name on that, I think makes a ton of sense for FENTY as a brand. And I also love that for the Liberty side of it, that because FENTY is held in such high regard, to be able to have a partnership with a team like that, I imagine that's helping to elevate them, to your point, free agency, other brand partners potentially. Like, now you want to be a part of this because you have brands like FENTY that are choosing us over any other option that they could have to continue to grow their share and to grow their brand.
I continue to point back to ownership, in particular, Clara Wu Tsai, who said that she wants the Liberty to be the first $1 billion women's sports franchise, like literally said she wants this to be the first organization that's valuation in women's sports reaches the $1 billion mark, right? So that's a hefty goal, and
Very.
that she is taking these steps towards. Again, the Met Gala, the partnership with Fenty, but I also want to give some love to some other folks in their front office: Kia Clark,
Mm-hmm.
Shayna Stevenson. You made the point earlier about who's in the room. Well, these are the people who are in the room. And what I love about the New York Liberty is everything they do speaks to the players, who they are and their true identity and self. We saw that in what Stewie wore at the Met Gala, or in John Paul Jones' hair, right? Like every thing of what they do with this organization lends itself to that, but it's also so New York, right? Whether that's Ellie has on Tim's right now, right? Like everything seems so strategic and so intentional. So giving big love to those three women and the strategy that they had for this team. And Fenty is another check on the box. Like, who can even reach Rihanna? Well, Clara Wu, size, someone who I believe can reach Rihanna, because I would just love to know all the numbers that she has in her cell phone. But yes, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's not that it's just any beauty brand, but Fenty has been speaking to women of color, which the WNBA is predominantly women of color, before a lot of other makeup brands were. And so it's a perfect marriage, and again, gets everyone's attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I love it. I love it.
What I am curious to see, so obviously we're talking heavy around the players, and I'm sure we're having visions of the players getting made up in Fenty. And I don't know if anyone else has any beauty deals. I don't think so. So I think in our heads, we think that's going to happen. But obviously, as I also just said, people could have other deals and maybe they don't naturally wear Fenty. So it'll be interesting to see how they choose to bring it to life from a player forward marketing perspective. But also to see what they do with the fans. I think the point of New York City and the diversity of this place and the fan base here, I think it's going to be really cool to see. I hope to see Fenty activating, with the fans, because those are the consumers. At the end of the day, that's what these brands are trying to do. They're trying to sell product. So I'm interested to see how they leverage it with their fan base, which is very diverse.
Yeah, and you make a great point. I would love for teams. I mean, I know they do announcements around some of obviously their brand partnerships, especially when it's this big. But I would love to see like a total audit of like who is investing with these teams and what do those activations look like. Or if you even give us a list, we can tell you what those activations look like, or what they don't look like, or what those partnerships look like or don't. But like I just even think about how transparent Kathy has been since the Changemakers program came about. Like we literally know who those investors are. I mean, obviously we see their names and logos everywhere, but we know who's a part of that Changemakers group. I want to know by team, like who is investing and what that looks like, because if we don't know, that seems like the bigger concern. And not that a check isn't great, but again, I just go back to a league that thrives on and craves authentic partnership, and the opportunity there is to just be front facing and all inclusive as a brand, and who's really doing that and who's not.
I mean, it's absolutely necessary. If you go into a partnership and just write the check, you're not going to see the ROI you're looking for. And what will happen is eventually you won't be able to write that check anymore, because someone's going to ask you, what did you get from this partnership? And the way to do that is to actually bring it to life. Using the Fenty example, like those are the consumers that are sitting in the stands. Yeah. So how are you ensuring that they are touching the product or understanding how it can work from them? Are there activations on site? Can you get your color corrected? Check. Can you have a makeover over the game? Can somebody, win it and then get to sit courtside? Like, what ideas are out there so that people are actually seeing it to work? And brands that are not doing that are the ones that are going to eventually say, this isn't working for me. Because right now we're not quite there yet where people are like, I have to be a part of this, or people are going to cancel my brand. They don't see me as a partnership of a WNBA or a team, a league, or athlete. They're going to think we're not relevant. It's not there yet. So people truly have to have the ROI to be able to keep writing the checks. And it's only going to happen if you spend more money to actually activate the partnerships.
And the pressure is great. I love the pressure. Like announcements like Fenty has probably the leader of some of these organizations saying, hey, I know we have a WNBA partnership, but what does that look like? Like, I think that is the key to all of these names and big brands that we see signing on is now other people are either asking questions about how they can get on, or since we have been investing, what does that look like for us? And hopefully asking those questions, taking stock, taking inventory, making sure you have the right people in the rooms that can bring those partnerships to life. So that's the aspect of it that gets me excited is every time we hear one of these announcements, there's more pressure. It's more pressure on other teams and ownership groups and front offices to figure out how to create those organic partnerships. But there's also pressure for the brands that are invested to show that worth and to show their organization where they're partnering with the WNBA and how that's impacting the consumer.
I love a little pressure
I
to get
love a little
everyone
pressure.
do what they got to do. So this is going to be very fun and exciting time. So this week is upfronts, new fronts. All those things are going on. So I've been seeing across my social around Netflix and Disney, ESPN, launching the direct to consumer situation. So I don't know. There's a lot going on there. But one thing that was really interesting was the concept of vibe check. So this 100% women hosted sports show, LaChina, I would love if like what sort of insights sort of led to ESPN or anyone else realizing that women are looking for sports shows that are women hosted and completely our perspective.
Yeah, huge shout out to ESPN to really have announced what I think is a groundbreaking partnership and their commitment to women's sports and women's perspective. That's an important aspect of this. So I'll speak to the announcement and then I'll speak to kind of what I think it does for sports, women's sports media. But the announcement itself was exactly what you just said. It's a new women-led platform called Vibe Check. There's a little bit of clarity. I know they will talk about women's sports, but they may also talk about other sports. Not exactly sure as to that aspect of it, but it will be a women's perspective all the way. They announced it with the big three, Andrea Carter, Elle Duncan, and Chinea Gumake, who I think with announcing with them, my thought is they will really be grounding the coverage for this new platform.
Yeah.
I loved the logo because it actually gave me a little Disney feel to it. It had kind of like a cartoon expression. So I think that's awesome, being that platform is going to be heavily involved. And it also says that this platform could be one that speaks to the younger sports viewer. Vibe Check also gives me kind of that feel of like, hey, we are crossing generations of sports fans, both in the name of the show, but again, in the logo and presentation. So I think it's going to be like 3 days a week. And it's going to be available on ESPN Plus and Disney Plus. So that's all I know of as of yet. And that's what I've read. And so not necessarily anything insider, but what I will say about this announcement is that ESPN has always been the front runner when it comes to women's sports, like in terms of acquiring programming rights. For me specifically, they've had the women's NCAA tournament as long as I've been doing it for women's basketball. Right now, they have all of the WNBA playoffs. I know that's going to change over the next few years with the rights deals. But we have had programming. What we haven't had is complementary programming with commentary, with the women's sports highlights. We haven't consistently had a space where it's just going to be women's voices speaking to what's happening in sports. So it's really uplifting the value of women in general, like not just women's sports, which is going to be a big part of this, but also like we want to hear from the leading voices in sport that are women. And when we wake up in the morning, like this is, in my opinion, going to be a show, since it's on 3 times a week, where we can get constant updates on what's happening in the women's sports landscape from trusted voices. And so, yes, we love programming, but we also love some conversation. We love to hear the perspectives. We love the headlines around women's sports. This is going to be a space that will focus very heavily on that aspect, which I think is phenomenal.
Gosh, you've made a really good point, because when I first read it, I was wondering, okay, I wonder why they chose to do this. But now that you're talking, I like to talk sports mostly with my female friends as well. I love our perspectives. I love the diversity and how we are talking about what's happening both on the field, court, pitch, as well as all the other stuff. I don't know. I just find a more diverse and rich, conversation. So as you talked about, that was like, oh yeah. So we have the big three or anyone else they choose to, for the show. It will be interesting to hear how women are covering all these things, because we don't stay on the beaten path. We tend to
Yes.
bring in some spice into those
Yes.
conversations, make people look at it differently. So that just actually got me excited, as someone who doesn't consistently watch talking heads around sport. That actually got me kind of excited to take a look at that show when it comes out. And it makes me
Yeah.
wonder what the content will look like too on social.
Yeah, I'm really looking, and quite honestly, the lines are continuing to blur as it pertains to like linear coverage and digital. I think there's so much value in the digital footprint now, especially because of how easily it translates to social, and how TikTok and Instagram and like just having content that continually can be played in various ways and places and can be accessed direct to consumer. Like it's so valuable and just really important in this new era that we're moving into. So kudos to ESPN, and I can't wait to see how this goes.
Yeah, and to see if other networks copy, right?
Yes.
It's also a sign that, people are doing things that are needed.
Yeah, I
So
was going to say, I do want to give shout out really quickly to the Women's Sports Network. I am on their advisory board. Led by Carol Stiff, Stuart McLean, he's actually, he's the top of the food chain, but Carol Stiff, who's a longtime executive for ESPN, and they have a women's sports network that's 24 hours women's sports programming. So they were coming along in this idea of, hey, let's have women's commentary, women's sports, but have it available all day, every day, almost like ESPN has with like Sports Center and just 24-hour sports as a network, which makes them so unique. So there's some different ideas popping up for how we can get more women's sports content. So shout out to all of those who are, visionaries and putting this into play.
And you know what, LaChina, like on this show, like I talk about not just women's, I talk about all sorts of angles in the sports industry. But I said one week how I was looking forward to women's sports being like the sports industry, including them, like, not having to say women separately, because they are so mainstreamed and people are talking about them every day. And as I'm sitting here thinking about this conversation we've had, we talked pretty much exclusively around women's sports. So it just, the little here, even with the Dick's example, we talked about the A1. So I think we are arriving, to that moment where this is where we need 24-hour coverage of it, because people are interested. The dollars are following, from the brands and the investors, and the attention, and the athletes are rising to the occasion. So this is a really cool time to have pioneered, as we both have in our respective lanes, but also to enjoy, what's happening, because it really is a movement and not the moment that people thought that it was going to be.
Yeah, well, I know you are not shocked that we talked about all women's sports while I'm on, because that's all I know. So, so we really didn't have a choice. But no, I love this platform, and I'm glad we got to have this conversation, and I'm glad we get to hear your expertise. Like, I want to give you your flowers too, because when it not only came to women's sports, but just women who look like us in playing at the highest levels of marketing at the intersection of sports and business, like you have been someone I've looked up to, long admired. You're a trailblazer. And I just was so excited. I can still remember the Mountain Dew 3-point contest and all of the things that you've done along the way, and all the activations, and just all of the ways you've made your mark in this business and industry. So shout out to you too. And I can't wait to see what the future holds, including more episodes of this platform. So thank you.
Oh, LaChina, thank you so very much. Thank you so much. I think we should end on that note. So thank you 1,000 times for joining me on How the Business is Played. You definitely have to come back. I know you're going to have to get real busy in the WNBA season, but do come back. And thank you for anyone that's listened this long. I hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next time.